A very good evening and warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine. Welcome back to the Dan Really Likes Wine cellar after a week of being on the Apps of Cape Epic and dropping in on a few wine estates in and around the route over the last week. It is very nice to be home. It was a wonderful, wonderful race. It's a terrific event. Kevin Vermark and his team have produced something that is world-class in every possible sense. And it was lovely being part of the commentary and events team. It's also lovely getting out into the winelands and seeing so many people during harvest time. And there is an electricity and energy to South African vineyards during harvest. There's a skip in the step. There's a smile on faces. There are a few beads of sweat because it's when the winemakers actually have to do some work and get stuck in. It was really nice to see so many people. And there were some highlights, and we got to film some stuff. A little bit of a salad. She catch up with Sam O'Keefe at her brand new space. She's redone her cellar and redone her home after those terrible fires. And so look out for that, amongst others, coming up in the next few months. This evening, we talk about a couple of things. We talk about a really exciting appointment for South Africa in the global wine industry. We speak to the person who has been appointed about that appointment. We also have a little chat about Guild Wine, chat about a couple of brand new releases, one in particular from an estate that makes exceptional red wine of the very highest quality. And all of that leads into a discussion on what really represents the best of Stellenbosch red wine. And I'm fascinated to see where this conversation goes. So that's coming up in just a couple of moments. First of all, though, here's some news from the world of wine. Well, that there is the Manor House at Nederburg. I'm sure many of you will recognize it. Plenty of history, plenty of attraction once you hit the Easter weekend, because they've got a whole pile of stuff happening. If you book in advance, you'll need to give them at least 24 hours notice. There are going to be picnics running in the garden. They're going to have massive Easter hunts, including adult Easter egg hunts. This is very important. So you no longer have to face the evil looks of people because you've elbowed their 6-year-old out of the way to get your hands on some Easter eggs. Those are the picnics you can see there. They'll be happening in the lawns at Nederburg. Beautiful view of the Drakensberg Mountains and the wine that Neil and his team oversee. And that is going to be happening over Easter weekend. If you're interested, head over to the Nederburg website. And I know that they would love to have you along for that Easter weekend. Not doing Good Friday, but they are doing everything else. So that's one to look out for over the Easter weekend. Also look out for Wednesday afternoon if you happen to be in Johannesburg. That is the Mr. Pants wine bar. Now, it's not the largest wine bar in the world, but it does accommodate slightly more people than it might look like from outside, even with COVID restrictions. And it will be home to Tom Pryor and the Radford Dale team on Wednesday. If you drop in there, they are doing a tasting, pouring some of the new Radford Dale wines from about 4:30 on Wednesday. Tom himself will be taking over the bar and producing an array of wine for you to taste and sample at Mr. Pants. That's Wednesday afternoon. There's no entry fee. Go along, grab a couple of mates. Should be a good afternoon. And there's the sprawling gardens at the Peach Hotel. Two reasons for mentioning that. One, Candace Phillip, who was the chef at the Saxon. She's now at the Peach. She's got a brand new menu kicking off at the end of this week. So if you're looking for somewhere a little different to dine and take advantage of some great wine, Tanashi and team, different Tanashi, then the Peach has got that new menu and a lovely wine list. It was also the home today for a launch of the new Wagener Loof range of wines, including 4 reds named after Dr. Loof, the new owner's children. Those are now on the market and available. And that is an estate that really is on the up. 2 Bertus Besson restaurants, plenty of investment, a real sense of the heritage of the place. And those wines just part of an estate that used to be just about ducks, but is now about slightly more. So keep an eye out for those next time you do some wine shopping. Right, let's head in to the world of red wine. And my very special guests we have from Toren, armed with the brand new vintage of the Fusion 5. Albie and Charles join us, and lovely to have them back on the show. We've also got Carl Schultz from down at Hartenberg, the master of Shiraz. I've got some Gravel Hill looking at me with a big, big smile. And we've also got Johan Kritter, except I'm not sure I can call him that anymore. We'll find the new title in a second. But welcome, guys. Lovely to have you all on the show. Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine.
Thank you.
Good evening, Dan.
Thanks very much.
I think we have Albie joining us in a moment. Charles, lovely to have you. Carl, a very warm welcome. And then, what do I call you? Is it Sir Kricher, Imperial Overlord Johan, His Greatness? Because you are now, Johan, no longer just the man behind Kanonkop, but the president of the IWSC. Congratulations. It's a huge accolade. Tell us exactly what that is, exactly what that means, and what it means to you to get that honor.
Good evening, Dan. It's a great honor to receive this award, but you can still call me Johan if you please. It's an honor more so for the South African wine industry, getting recognition from one of arguably the most important international wine competition, which I think, and I stand to be correct, but I think it started in 1969. Kanonkop has been participating there ever since we were allowed back into the international trade, which was in 1991. And since then, we've had remarkable successes there on the international platform. And now getting this award at the end of my life is an honor. It's a great honor. But as I said, I think it means more recognition for South Africa as a premium wine brand, and we can now comfortably play in the major league of wine producing countries.
You are, I think, only the second South African to get this honor. The first, about 1996, I think, was Dr. Anton Rupert. So it's a fairly esteemed company in which you sit. What is the actual day-to-day meaning, impact of this role? What do you have to do? What does it involve?
I'm not even sure yet, but be it as it may. It's to be true, I think it's more an honorary position where I will be attending one or two international functions of the IWSC, especially the award ceremony at the end of the year, and then hosting some of the senior people on the IWSC management team on Kanonkop, coming to South Africa, to the South African wine industry, and with a lot of international wine tasters as well, and just showing them around South Africa. They've heard about us, they know about us, and now they're giving recognition to us. So they're here on a fact-finding mission as well, and thereby promoting, hopefully, South Africa as a premium wine destination. And then at the same time also tasting South African producers' wines that's participating at this year's IWSC competition.
So it sounds then, in wrapping it up, like it's a great ambassadorial opportunity to showcase South African wine, and I know you'll take it with great enthusiasm, do a fabulous job for South African wine. What will be your philosophy behind using this position to showcase the very best of South Africa to as wide an audience as possible?
The platform is now there for South African wine on an international base, and I will do my utmost to start taking this message even further to the international wine crowd, the international wine consumer, promoting the competitiveness of the South African wine industry. Since '91, I think we have, and I don't like the term, but we had a new wave of winemakers that were very innovative with a lot of new initiatives, and they're now getting into their mid-years, But lo and behold, we again got a couple of new youngsters on the block, and they're even more innovative. And it's really trying to get this mix of innovation and tradition and quality, getting the promotion on the international wine floor, and thereby building up the South African wine industry. And then obviously the major principles of the IWC, and that is by and large promoting or giving recognition to the best wine producers internationally.
If you need some clarification, IWSC, it's not a branch of the Swiss watch firm. It is the International Wine and Spirits Competition. And Johan is now in charge. He's running everything. So expect France to win nothing this year. South Africa win everything. You talk about the job to do and the support network. You've got a wonderful support network in the Cape Winemakers Guild, which takes us nicely over to Carl Schultz, who we get introduced in all manner of ways. I've lost track of the number of awards and accolades that Carl has to his name. But I see Carl, and I'm sure with a great deal of delight, we find you as part of the Cape Winemakers Guild steering team for this next 2 years.
Yeah, that's right, yes. It's full circle there. The esteemed gentleman who preceded me when I joined the Guild in 1997, and a few years later found myself chair. I think more because nobody else wanted the position, and we were a young green steering committee, and we engaged one Mr. Kricher to be our business advisor and our mentor, as it were. So we felt we needed an old head on the team. And once Johan got too busy and stepped down eventually, having taught us many tricks of the trade, that tradition continued. And yeah, today I'll be serving on my third committee and paying it forward, I guess. And I often refer to Johan's contribution, and that's what we try and emulate. And it's nice to give something back to all those young guns we're talking about. There's some young ladies too, who are very talented and certainly rock the comfort zone. The Guild is in an amazing period. I actually think the best I've ever seen the Guild in over 25 years of membership, where we've got a real insurge of all those top names, a lot of the names that have created the news and have shifted the spotlight to the southern tip of Africa. They're now on board. There's no longer any possibility that a finger can be pointed that it's elitist or exclusionary. But the rules still stand. The requirement is 5 years of consistent high-end production of wine. The product needs to be credible, most importantly, and of course, as important, I guess, they have to be wines of excellence. And no, it's just an absolute pleasure to have watched the Guild evolve. When I joined, there were 14 members, and today we are almost 50. And it reflects the growth at the high end, the quality end, the tip of the spear, as it were. That drives quality, I guess, for this country. But it's the Guild's in a very good place right now. It's upbeat, it's positive, it's more certainly, I think, with a younger demographic. There's certainly a even greater willingness to share and to exchange information, and that's exactly what the Guild's about. It's about the collective good. And it's vibrant, it's exciting. And for the grey ones in the organization, like myself and a few others, it's very invigorating. A little alarming too, because we need to pull up our socks. But that's all good, keeps us honest.
You do have a lot of young winemakers who are following in your footsteps, but also ensuring that nobody gets complacent in their winemaking because the quality just keeps getting better and better and better. We've got one of those young winemakers I'm going to chat to in a second. Before we do that, though, Albie, from a marketing business perspective, it's very much your game in the world of wine. When you see Johan appointed as president of the IWSC, when you see the guild in the hands of people like Carl, how important is that for our South African wine industry as we look to not just grow locally, but also impress upon more of the world that South Africa sits very much in a premium wine space, not necessarily just that bulk space for which we are in some places still unfortunately only associated?
Hello, Dan. Yes, I think, first of all, congratulations to Johan Krieger with the achievement. I think for South Africa and the whole, these are the things that make people stand up and notice us. In the world of wine, we're always neglected as a country that also, some people don't even understand that we make wine, but our wines are world standards, all our accolades, but also the standard of the quality of wine. I mean, we see a lot of foreigners at all our wineries coming through the tasting room, talking to them, and they're all astonished about the quality that we as a country can offer. And for us, it's all about not just the tour, but I think all of us, it's about flying the flag of South Africa out there and taking it to the clients, whether it's whatever market it is, and really understanding, showing them what we as South Africa can do. And the big thing is that when we start getting international recognition, as now what has happened, people are really looking at the Cape Wine Auction, the Cape Winemakers Guild, and the IWC, and having South Africans presenting us on these platforms makes people look at us differently. And we just need to keep on pushing. I think in the last 20 years, the wine industry in South Africa has changed dramatically. And it's up to us to make those changes and not fall behind.
Well, I think that we're very much in the right direction, and today's guests are a good example thereof. Part of headed in that right direction is continuing to deliver world-class wine, and that's another part of this evening's show. Charles makes the wine, Albie drinks it. That's kind of how things work at Toren. Charles, lovely to have you back on the show. We've got one of your new wines. Before I ask you to tell me about this Fusion 5, we have a taste of it, whether it's people specifically like Johan and Carl, or just speaking more generally of the generation that's come before you, how much of an influence, how important has it been for you as a winemaker to have guys like this setting benchmarks and blazing a trail for you then to be able to come in as a young winemaker yourself?
Yeah, Dan. So first of all, for when we are on Bioflip, I think this is a huge thing, not only for yourself, but as you mentioned, for South Africa, it's really a big thing. And as you mentioned, so I think there were some classic wines growing up. So you had your Kanonkops. I think Hartenberg was definitely part of the mix there. So you've always had these classic wines that probably wasn't as well recognized internationally as they are now and as they should have been back then. So those were the ones we looked up for. And I always say a classic is a classic for a reason. What we see nowadays in the wine industry is you've got a lot of new guns or young guns, and we're doing very exciting things. But I always think the tip of the spear is that classic done well. That's what I really love and I appreciate. And a lot of the guests today were the bench setters of that. So it's great to be in the company, and thank you from a young winemaker's perspective, and also from a South African perspective.
The flip side, of course, to all of that is that you have to ensure, Charles, that you maintain these very high standards. And with the world watching us closely through the IWSC lens, and with so many great winemakers in South Africa, you have to keep up the standards, and at Toren as well, because your wines are extremely well known and people have come to expect a certain level of brilliance, which leads us into this Fusion 5. Before we look at the specific vintage, tell us a little bit more generally about the philosophy behind making this particular wine.
Okay, Dan. So when we started, we were the first people in South Africa to use all five novel Bordeaux red varieties in our blend, excluding, of course, Carmenere. So our philosophy in making this wine is to truly reflect the terroir. So the Fusion 5 comes from a west-facing slope, slightly warmer, and that leans towards the dominance of the Cabernet in the blend. It's got a big portion of Malbec. And Malbec, I think in South Africa, could be a little bit of a controversial variety. I believe if you get it just right, there's not a lot of wines that in a blend can deliver that amount of X factor to a wine as Malbec does. So in this specific blend, we've got about 14% Malbec. And it really just gives you the punch. It gives you the Toren signature, I almost want to say, that DNA. And then you get a nice softening effect with the Merlot from the warmest area. And then the variety, and you can catch me in a trap with this variety, it's Cab Franc. It just brings a lot of freshness, a lot of vibrancy to the blend. And very much so in the 2019, which we are tasting today. So the philosophy around it is just to work as close as possible to nature in the vineyards, try and get the most perfect berries from there. And then in the cellar itself, we take a little bit more of a minimalist approach, working very softly and gently. And of course, that's what the Toren is also known for, is that we work with gravity in the cellar. So also just that very respectful, soft manner in which we handle the wine once it transforms into liquid form. So yeah, that's the philosophy behind the Toren and the Fusion 5.
And a word on the particular vintage. Are we doing what we seem to have done for the last while? Those odd numbers are really showing up. 15 and 17, very different vintages, but both very successful. Is 19 on trend?
Dan, so 19 is actually a vintage that's got me very excited. When we were in the vintage, it was quite cold, quite European, if I can call it that. So I'm a person that's very intrigued by nature. So I do a lot of things to study nature. I've got a lot of little correlations that over time I've worked on, and to see how a vintage would progress and when you would probably go into that peak performance of the berry and going into that perfect complexity where you get perfect ripeness in the berry. And really early on in 2019, I saw that what I was tasting was not lining up to any of my old correlations that I kind of got in my head. So I actually told Martin, which was the assistant winemaker back then and today is the winemaker, that I don't want to see any analysis before the two of us had made a final decision on picking. Because we were picking Cab Franc at ridiculously low sugars. And when the wines came into the cellar, it was just spectacular, the amount of aromatic vibrancy that the wines had. So initially we thought that the wine would just be a little bit more medium-bodied, much more aromatic. So again, going into that European context, which fits perfectly with our wines anyways. But what has astonished me is, as time has progressed, that wine is actually filled in and it's got an amazing depth to it as well. So you get this clarity from the aromatic side. You get this nice red cherries, just ripe cranberries. You go into the purple fruit spectrum, blueberry spectrum. But then the density of the wine carries it really, really well. And the nice thing is, as you're tasting the wine, you're going to that second and third sip, the acidity becomes brighter and brighter as you're going along. So it's a wine that I'm hugely excited to share both nationally with our clients and internationally, and hopefully something that a lot of people will enjoy over the coming year.
I don't think they'll be hard pushed to enjoy this particular wine. De Toren, actually, this Fusion 5, I'm not sure if I've ever told you this, either Albie or Charles. It was one of the first really premium wines I had when I got invited out to a dinner. I probably had no real justification being part of, and De Toren Fusion 5 was served up, and I got very excited and intended to drink lots of it going forward until I discovered it was slightly out of my University of Cape Town student budget, but I've had plenty of it ever since, and I enjoyed it both in its own right, but also as a reflection, and it's been beautifully put by Charles, a reflection of where the wine comes from. And Stellenbosch is many things in the wine world. It is home of some great Chardonnay, some lovely Chenin Blanc. You can drink some great bubbles. There are lots of different wines made across the different areas of Stellenbosch. But I really feel that it is still ultimately red wine territory in terms of its number one offering. Mr. President, sir, is that a fair assessment? You only make red wine, obviously. I'm sure there's a little bit of a nudge in the red wine direction, but it is, despite all of the other varietals we can make very successfully in Stellenbosch, is it still fair to say that it is premium red that flies the flag highest for the Stellenbosch region?
I think that the message in terms of sight and what sight can deliver to you has sunk in. The technology is there currently. It's available all over South Africa to define sites and which different varietal one should plant on those specific sites. In the olden days, my early years, every producer had a whole fruit salad of wines. And then the concept of site became more and more and more important. And with all this technology available today, it is quite clear that Stellenbosch is arguably South Africa's most premium wine region, and even more so in terms of red varietals.
Which then leads to what I think is a fairly natural follow-up question, Johan. To what point, and I had a similar conversation with Jean Engelbrecht over lunch last week, to what stage do we nudge towards France and start saying, right, although we can do 100 things really well, we do a few of them exceptionally well, and start to narrow down the focus. And I think we're seeing it already, people like Ernie Els bringing down the variety of what they perhaps had on their wine list 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and focusing more specifically on, in the case of Louis Cabernet Sauvignon, but a few estates doing that. Is that going to be a trend for Stellenbosch in particular, where we do some things very well, we do other things amazingly? Let's really focus on the amazing.
It's a long process. It's capital intensive to replant vineyards. It's about 2 years before you start planting, where the soil just lies bare, and then there's another 3 years, 4 years before you start harvesting. So it's not a quick fix, but we are moving in that direction. But on the other hand, South Africa, arguably again, is one of the most diversified wine producing countries in the world. We just got to find the right spots, what to plant where. And to my mind, and I'm not taking anything away from the Chardonnays, there's some top Chardonnays in Stellenbosch, similarly to Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling that Carl produces, Chenin Blancs. So I think, going forward, our future lies in defining the right soil types for specific varietals. But our strength as an industry arguably lies with the diversity that South Africa has, and being able to use that to our optimum.
And herein lies probably our biggest challenge. It's a wonderful conundrum to be in, and you put it very well, Johan, that we are so extraordinarily diverse in what we can produce. And if you were to simply say, right, well, Stellenbosch is just going to be big and amazing red wines, and then you think, oh, now hang on, what about, let's take a good example, Carl's Eleanor Chardonnay, which is a glorious wine. We would never want to lose that, and it applies to a lot of areas. If you only have the Hemelanada as Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, suddenly you lose out on Restless River's exceptional Cabernet Sauvignon, or some of the other wines that JC's doing at Creation. Carl, for you, as somebody who's made his fair share of vintages, you know how well the reds do. The Gravel Hill, which we're going to talk about in detail in just a moment, being one of the great red acts that comes off that Hartenberg stage. Is it a challenge, a juggle for you as a winemaker to have all of these resources, have all of this potential, and try and work out where to direct it?
I think it was Gary Player who said the more you practice, the better you get, or something along those lines. And I guess the point that Johan made and what John would have referred to about the European model over time, keep in mind places like Alsace have been doing wine since the 15th century. Over time, every site marries one or two varieties. But site isn't just a property. You know, within a property there are multiple sites. What few people know is that the Western Cape is not just the only wine growing region on earth that's bordered by two big oceans and huge effect of the southerly wind. It's the most wind affected region on earth when it comes to growing wine commercially. But these soils date back 250, 300 million years. And as soils get older, they have a characteristic quite common, that they more and more show diversity. You have more and more subsoils developing, and soil for a winemaker, or number of soils, is a bit like having colors on a palette for an artist. You know, the more colors you have, the more you can do. And I've been fortunate to have I've just completed, natural fact today, my 29th vintage at Hartenberg. And I now understand a lot more clearer about what will work where. We're fortunate at this estate that we have 9 different types of soil. And I'd be able to tell you that if I planted the same variety on the different soils, they would all make markedly different wines. And so I think that's something which takes time. I think it takes all of a decade for a wine grower to understand his terroir and to focus. Johan's right. Fruit salad was the operative word. I worked at a property in the late 80s. We did 25 different wine labels, varietal labels. And I think if you look at what's happening more and more, the guys whittle them down to, say, 5 or 7 labels. But the wonderful thing is our country is free. We have the world's best constitution. And I always like to tell my European winemaking friends, we're not restricted. We are artists that are free to paint what we want. And we're in that happy stage. We're a developing country as far as wine goes. We lost a big chunk of our wine heritage for multiple reasons. But I think we're at a stage now where I think Stellenbosch has already claimed Cabernet as its poster child. You mentioned Restless River. I think on 1 or 2 hands we can count examples of that grape at excellent outside of this appellation, and that's not because I'm in Stellenbosch. That's just because that's the fact, and that's rare. And you know, we have similar examples of that in Australia. We have Coonawarra, which is famous for the same variety, and then again, speaking to diversity, is that Stellenbosch is also able to produce something like Syrah. And it's no secret that we're on the warmer side of Stellenbosch, bordering what eventually becomes the Swartland. And that's exactly why that desert grape, that really hardy, tough guy, Syrah, is able to flourish in the Bottleray Hills. And the Stellenbosch Syrahs are extremely different from anything from the Swartland. We like to think they're better, of course, but no, they're very fruit driven, very red and black fruit, whereas I think you get more pepper and spice in the Swartland. But I agree with you.
I think Carl's saying, I agree with you. And then the internet shut down on him. First time ever somebody was going to agree with me on a wine subject. I was getting quite excited. We'll drop Carl for a second. We'll come back to him.
Let's ignore the fact that
No, all right. We'll steady that up in a moment and come back to Carl in just a second. Head down the road. Let's get another winemaker's opinion there, Charles. The wine that you guys make is very firmly in a broad spectrum of wine. It is premium red. That approach of, well, this is what we're good at, we're going to do lots of it, would seem to speak to the Toren. But as a broader approach across Stellenbosch, where do your views lie?
So first of all, I think, and I'm in the red wine sector, so I must definitely promote that. But I must mention Chenin Blanc here. I think if there's one grape to unify South Africa and both in terms of volume, but most specifically in terms of quality that can compete with the international side of it, with the Loire Valley, I think Chenin Blanc has a very big part to play here. When you go to the reds, there's a whole lot of ways to approach it. You've got, of course, Pinotage, which is the South African bred variety. There's some great examples of that. I think more and more so that's gonna start playing a important role in our industry. I think what we do most well and what we should focus on is Cabernet is obviously a very important grape, in my opinion, for promoting South Africa. And then more and more so, I think blends. I think if you go and look at the amount of premium classic blends, South Africa has a lot to show. I'm in the company of a lot. Mr. Krieger, the Paul Sauer is a great example of a great flag bearer for South Africa. And there's a whole range of spectrum that you can play within. So you can go from very classic, very precise Kanonkop. You can go to the Compostela of Provera, which is a little bit more edgy. It's got a little bit more of that aromatic potential, playing a little bit more on the cab front. And I think those really high quality, pristine, clean wines, that should be a focus. So it's very diverse. It's a question that you can actually start reasoning and you can just go around in circles. But I do think they have got a really huge role to play. And what's even better if we can produce that wines in volumes and at quality, which is substantial enough to create a footprint. Again, I think Kanonkop is a great example of that. So that's what my focus would be, is just on promoting the tip of the spear in terms of quality, and the rest will just follow, in my opinion.
It would ideally just simply be the story of the wine. Wine is made, it is good, out it goes, it sells, people enjoy it, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. In terms of telling the wine story, Albie, does it ease the story if we have got all of these amazing wines that can come from an area like Stellenbosch, or does it make it a bit simpler, especially when you go internationally, as the people know immediately, right, that's Stellenbosch, that means this is Swartland, that means that. From a marketing perspective, where's the sweet spot, if there is one?
I think, again, our diversity in our country is there to be shown. That's something that we have, as Carl mentioned, the amount of soil types. And that's so that we should really show the world what we can do in terms of our areas. Stellenbosch, I agree 100% with Johan and with Carl and with Charles that, we are Bordeaux. We are the Bordeaux blend guys, but we can also do fantastic Shiraz, and we should focus on all of those aspects and just market it out there. I don't think we should ring fence ourselves and listen, Chenin is only for Stellenbosch, as I do think that Chenin in Stellenbosch is fantastic. I agree with Charles. But so, we can make Sauvignon Blanc here, and we should just find our niches in these markets, and promote that to the world. Because if you travel as a tourist in South Africa, you go Stellenbosch, you move to Hermanus, you travel the wineries there. Of course, the Shiraz, the wines will be different to you. That makes it exciting. I think it's like exploring the next one and the next one and the next one. And for me, it's just to show the world what diversity we have, just in our people, in our country, in our whatever we do. we have that, and we should use that to and not just ring fence ourselves and listen. This is what Stellenbosch only does, but we do things in Stellenbosch that's exceptional, that I don't think other wine regions in South Africa can do better than us. And I want to really, we must make Stellenbosch, the region, really premiumize again and bring back that love for Stellenbosch wines, because we've got it, and we just have to tell the world that what we can do here, not forgetting about our sisters and our brothers, our next door neighbors, but really to bring it, because this is the porthole of South African wine business, is Stellenbosch.
It's almost like being a rugby coach and having Cheslin Colby at your disposal. Do you pick him at fullback or at wing? If so, which wing? Or maybe scrum half? Or there's so much you can do. We have all of this ability. Where do we focus? And it's a good problem to have, and it's one that I think is such a rich and vibrant part of the wine story. But it is one that's going to direct to a degree where we go over the next 2 years. This idea of premium reds is brought together not just by the guests today, but also, as I mentioned earlier, a conversation I had over dinner on Saturday night at the Wine Glass in Stellenbosch with Dan Really Likes Wine Junior Director Michael Jordaan, who was wrapping up another week of riding his mountain bike and not doing much else. And he sat down with me over dinner and we decided to try some of the flights of wine. And one of them was the Apex Red Flight. Now, it is 500 Rand for a flight of wine. Well, 500 Rand for 6 tastings of wine, that's ridiculous. Well, maybe until you see what is in that flight. And see if I can remember them. There was The Mystery by Jasper Raats down at Longridge, which is about normally 2,000 Rand a bottle. Waterford's The Gem, that's about 13 or 1,400 Rand a bottle. There was the Sophia from Jordan, that's well over 1,000 Rand a bottle. The Lady May at Glenelly, another big red blend, Bordeaux inspired, Bordeaux owner. Then there was also the I'm missing one. There was the Gravel Hill, which is part of the reason why we have Carl joining us on the show this evening, and of course a black label from Kanonkop, which ties in Johan, and those were 6 extraordinary wines, and at 500 Rand to taste those 6 was a real privilege. And it's expensive, but it allows you to taste 6 wines that collectively you're nudging towards a sort of 15,000 Rand or thereabouts, so out of the realm of most people, which led into a debate between myself and Michael. If we had to pick our 6, and not saying we wouldn't have picked those specific 6, but which would we have a go at? And the names that came in as we started thinking about everything from Ruston Freer to 1694 to the high-density Eden Cabernet Franc from Brouwer, through to the signature from Ernie Els, the Garland from Simonsuch. You've got all of these wines that sit in a very, very high-end space. So kicking off with you, Carl, lovely to see your wine in that sort of company. Not really surprising, though. I've had it in the company of Mouton Rothschild on an Emirates flight a few years ago. What are some of those big premium wines that for you fit into that space, that scream from the rooftops, this is the very best of Stellenbosch? Now, I think Carl has taken a vow of silence on answering that particular question. Let's see if we can get him back in a moment and ask the same question of Johan, whose black label featured in that Apex list at the Wine Glass. Johan, the reds for you that really are the aristocrats of the Stellenbosch scene?
They're pretty representative. But I will put my head in a political jam jar like Cyril does very occasionally, by starting to pinpoint which is the better wine or the better red wines within the Stellenbosch region. We must still remember, and I think this is very important, and I've actually learned that, or was taught that by my grandfather, Paul Sauer, who said, wine is for the kings and also the Joe Soaps of this world. And if it so happens that you prefer Shiraz personally, or you prefer Cabernet Sauvignon personally, or Syrah, or whatever the case may be, that is your option, and you go with that. So as a producer of primarily Cabernet Sauvignon and Pinot Noirs, to pinpoint a couple of brands, I'll take the long game on that one.
You make the man a president and immediately he turns into a diplomat. All right, some very, very fair points and appropriate ones to make. And I suspected that there might have been a certain taking of the Fifth Amendment when pushing all of our guests on their top six. It's a whole array of names, both the ones on the list of the wine glass and the ones I mentioned. You could also add to that list a couple of others very happily. Premium in quality, premium price, the Black Lion and Book 17. Those are wines that would sit very happily on that particular flight. It might drive the price of the flight up a bit, but they sit in that area. Your sense of what really speaks to premium red in Stellenbosch, and then how those two wines of yours fit into that story?
Dan, I'm also going to apply my Fifth Amendment as Johan did. So now I think in the last 20 years, the amount of young or privately owned, family owned wineries that's popped up has really shown, and there's so many to choose from. But with that as well, that also the more the cooperatives, the bigger wineries that historically were there, it's also drawn up their socks. So I think all in all, it's very difficult to go and choose. I'm going to use a company like KWV that suddenly brought out the Mentors range, and suddenly, wow, the eyes are open to that winery, because in a way they were a little bit not forgotten, but the privately owned companies came about, and suddenly they also came back at it. So to really put down 10 wines, 20 wines, 30 wines, I think it's more to do with also the fact that you must look at the marketing of companies. Where do they position themselves, and who do they go up against? And we need to really look at those aspects if we want to go forward. How are we as South Africa going to market ourselves? The wines are there. You can go and choose whatever. If it's a Pinot Noir or a Chenin or a Sauvignon Blanc or a whatever, we have the ammunition to shoot. We just need to get to the right people to shoot them with that ammunition. So I'm not going to stick my head out and pinpoint, but we try to be leaders at the Toren with those things. And I think it's fantastic that guys like, with the Stork of Hartenberg, with the Eleanor, with the black label of Kanonkop, with the Book 7, with the black labels, we are pushing the labels of quality, but we're also pushing the price tag. And that's what inevitably is going to, make people stand up and realize what we are. We are not here to, play a game. We are here as serious business people, as serious wineries, to make a mark in the world of wine.
The response from many people who aren't intimately acquainted with the wine industry: how can you sell a bottle of wine for 3,000 Rand? And then you go over to Europe and you find a bottle of Bordeaux at £150 or thereabouts if you're buying it in London. And you go, well, hang on, our South African wine is just as good as this. So there is definitely an argument. And I really do approve of those top-end wines going up and bringing the rest of the industry up with them. What it does, though, Charles, for you as a winemaker, is it means you have to be able to justify this is a wine that's worth 2,500, 3,500 Rand as you're tasting it and giving it to people and getting them to get a sense of why it has got this price tag. What sort of pressure does that put on you as a winemaker?
Dan, so I was actually very lucky when I was quite young. I had the opportunity to do an internship at Screaming Eagle in the Napa Valley. And I mean, that's probably one of the, from outside Europe, outside Bordeaux, Burgundy maybe, one of the most well-known wineries. And I went there with a lot of preconceived ideas of how can a bottle of wine cost 750 euros. This is now 10 years ago. And I remember having a lot of ideas in my head about how big the wine would be and how powerful the wine would be. And based on what I read in Robert Parker's Wine Advocate, I had a lot of preconceived ideas. And the very first time that I got to taste that wine was a little bit of a watershed moment for me. All my preconceived ideas were completely false. It was a wine that was actually much more medium-bodied than you would think. It was extremely precise, extremely pure. It spoke of the place. I got to work with the grapes. I got to see the little hills in an area that actually shouldn't be producing that type of quality wine. What made it special? And that's our philosophy that we also take on the book 7 in the Black Line, is that you should not try and sell a wine by over-engineering it. We actually go the other way around, and we try and find what's special and focus in on that. So it's first of all, it's a really introspective look at the soils that you've got, the soils that was matched up by a lot of research, but also sometimes by a bit of luck to the perfect variety. Once you've got that, you go and you do a reselection on the amount of grapes that you want on there, only choosing the most perfect bunches. Then you go deeper and you only select the most perfect berries. And again, with the winemaking on those really ultra premium wines, we try and be as hands-off as possible, fermenting them in small French oak barrels. So they really get the minimal amount of, let's call it, manual interaction with humans. So it's actually about encapsulating the purity and the essence of what's happening outside, as opposed to trying to convince somebody that it is worth a certain price by over-engineering it. I think that becomes very apparent. I think we've got the term for it, like you call it blockbuster wines. It's those wines that you sit down, your first initial glass, you kind of pick it up and you go, whoa, and then it kind of loses its appeal after one glass. I'd rather have a wine that the first time you've maybe got a preconceived idea because it's of a higher value. So you go there and you're like, okay, interesting. And as you start exploring it, it's just giving you dimensions and dimensions and dimensions the whole time. So that's the way that I think about these ultra premium wines, or wines with maybe a little bit of higher price point, is that it's not necessarily about convincing the consumer by over-engineering a wine that it is good, but actually going the other way and actually focusing on finding what's special in your vineyards and displaying that.
The best vineyards from exceptional terroir in the hands of a very skilled winemaker, and you're well on your way to exactly the kind of wines we are celebrating this evening. I think we have got Carl back, so let's wrap up by jumping back to Mr. Schultz, whose Gravel Hill was on that Apex list, still is on that Apex list at the Wine Glass in Stellenbosch. Carl, everybody else has chickened out completely and refused point blank to name a single wine. Can we get out from you a couple of the red wines that you feel in that premium flag-bearing Stellenbosch space, not just over one or two vintages, but over time, have been such an integral part of allowing the rest of the wine world to understand that Stellenbosch is such a good home for top red wine?
Yeah, Dan. So perhaps with a bit more of a devil-may-care approach, I wouldn't, for me, I wouldn't single out the wines, but I'd single out the properties, perhaps. It's no surprise that one or two of the properties that I respect and admire greatly, that they not just produce one great wine, but I mean, think of Kanonkop. They do a few great wines. And for me, that's that mix about the jockey on the right horse in the right place. And so without fear or favor, as the public protector, the previous one, used to say, certainly the top guns, they bear the flag, they fly the flag, and these aren't local recent startups. These are people, everybody can produce a great wine and a great vintage, but it's those tougher vintages where it counts. And these guys can do that. Ruston Freda, Kanonkop, De Trafford, Telegraph, Uvamira, and then perhaps my reserve player, number 6, would be Tukara. Now, having said that, terroir and ownership and site is everything. I would also add, in the Southern Hemisphere, the jockey also plays a big role. So, for example, on Toren, you've got everything in place, but they've had a winemaking change, and everybody will watch and see how things go. But generally, the terroir stands instead for everything else. But those in rapid fire, that's my pick.
That's being argued with by Carl's dog, who does not approve of that selection at all. I think it's a wonderful tribute to some well-deserving recipients there. Takara Stuart Butter having taken over from Miles Mossop, and there Ilios sits in that very high-end bracket. Dele Graaf with Mornay at the helm there. Sir Lawrence Graaf is also a high-end bottle of wine. But thank you for that, Carl, because those are all people like yourself who are deserving of that sort of applause. I see Joshua Hartnick is watching on YouTube. Hey, Dan, how are you? Thank you for great coverage. Thank you. But then also Ngoni Mtizwa asking, is the South African market ready for these wines and prices? Or do most of these wines end up on the international market? Well, perhaps that's a question for another day. I think Albie in particular would be a great person to answer that, because his wines are flying off the shelves at the Toren. Where are they going? Well, we'll have to bring that into another show, because we are just about at the end of this one. But it's been a fascinating show. It's been the opportunity to taste the new Toren, the 2019 vintage. Charles proclaims himself very excited with it. I can see why, but I can also see that it's a wine with a journey that is very much just beginning. And together with Albie, they'll be taking this wine on that journey, along with the Book 17 and the Z and the Black Lion and the premium red wine, which De Toren does so well. We also had the opportunity today to celebrate Carl and his Cape Winemakers Guild and the work that they do, and to doff a cap to our new president of the IWSC, but altogether to also have a talk about premium red wine. And there are no definitive answers in any of this, but it is a great series of conversations to have as we try and get a better understanding of where we are today, where we've come from, and where we're going tomorrow in South African wine. So to all of you, to Albie and to Charles, and to Carl, and to your Imperial Majesty, Lord Krige, guys, thank you all so much for being part of today. Lovely drinking the wine, lovely chatting to you all, and lovely just being able to celebrate, because De Toren and Kanonkop and Hartenberg are all such integral parts of the success of South African wine, and it's lovely to be able to share stories from the people behind that success. So I have a bottle of Fusion 5 to finish off, some 2005 Gravel Hill, which is also it has been, I have Coravin it, but I think it might get open. And Johan, just so you don't feel left out, there's also some 2013 Cabernet Sauvignon to make up my collection of wine for this evening. Guys, to all of you, thank you. It's always a delight having you on the show. Look forward to doing it again soon. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
So there we go. Well done, Johan Krige, President of the International Wine and Spirits Council. Ngoni Mtizwa, keep looking out. We'll have that show soon on whether our big wines can find a local home. I think the answer is yes. I've seen wine at Marble and Tang and Saint and like. There's definitely, I think, a market, but is it a big enough one? We'll talk about that on another day. We've got more wine coming up through the course of the week, as we always do. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your Monday evening. We'll see you back live on Thursday. Keep drinking South African wine, and goodbye. This month's competition is brought to you by Bellingham, and it's the chance to head out to Le Coin Francais, that's in the heart of Franschhoek, 4 people, a 5-course tasting menu prepared by Chef Darren Badenhorst, paired with vintage Bellingham wine. Superb food from an absolutely outstanding chef, and some really good vintage Bellingham wine. And that is all yours. Simply tell us why on our social media channels you should be the winner of this particular prize. Let us know, and 4 of you could be spending an evening at Le Coin Francais, dining fabulously and drinking wonderful wine. To join the Pick and Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.